Now, one of the things, if you're new to us, you won't know about me, but maybe if you've been here for a while, you may not know this as well. But one of the things about me that just kind of I hold often inside of me, I try not to reveal it too much. It does come out at home. My family can attest to this. These are things that can just kind of live within me. And it's this thing that I call social conventions. Like, I love social conventions. I love having expectations of what things will be like to be met. So, to be specific and particular, I love social conventions that I like. That are, hey, this is the way things should be. These are the things that are right, and this is what I believe is right. And when they happen, it just feels like, oh, that's good. It's happening. And when it doesn't, it just like bottles up within me, and I try to younger me, we came out in inappropriate ways. More mature, older me, it comes out maybe more bottled up. I don't know. I'm working on it. I'm a working process. But I think if we're all honest, there's things about social conventions and expectations that we all carry and have within us. For example, one of these social conventions in Saskatchewan, for example, that we kind of hold and try to understand, and this is our provincial, maybe it's more particular to our city, but it's a social convention that we all think we are right about. It's one of these things that we're like, this is the way to do it, and I know what you think, but this is the way to do it. If you just do it my way, things will go so good. I'm of course talking about the zipper merge. This whole message is going to be about, no, I'm just kidding. Just joking. I'm not going to teach. This is a helpful illustration here, right? But we all have reasons to believe that we are correct and others are incorrect when we find expectations, when we meet these different social conventions, and we have reasons to say, well, my way or the way I see this to be true is the truest true and the rightest right. I think I might have made up some words, but so if you're from another province visiting, a zipper merge means drivers use both lanes of, no, I'm just kidding. This is a topic that's widely contested and discussed in our city, in our province. It's often on the radio, it's on TV. We're all trying to figure it out. But it exists, it's out there. And it's out there because we believe expectations, social conventions, and what is right is right. And so we all carry these things. Now, for myself, growing up as a new Canadian, it forced me to pay attention to social cues. It forced me, before I even knew English, to really pay attention. What is expected of me in a certain environment? What is expected of me when I'm part of a different community? What are people expecting me to be like within this setting? And so when I paid attention to those kind of things, I tried to learn the social framework, expectations, and it was helpful, actually. Because once we knew it, once I understood it, it was like, okay, I can kind of feel grounded in this space now. I can feel secure that I belong here. I can feel safe because I'm functioning within this understood convention. And so I think if we're all honest, in many ways, we all bring variety of frameworks and expectations into every interaction, into every environment that we enter. And there's a good science behind this. There's a science to support that these expectations, these desires for predictability, these desires for order are actually a good thing. At the very least, they help us avoid uncertainty and potential chaos, and they keep us grounded. We are wired to want and to be part of ordered set of expectations that make sense to us. Really, what we want is to know how the world works and what is our part in it. What is my meaning in this environment? What is my expectation? How do I contribute? How do I live in the space of expectations? So we grow up, we learn social cues, we try to understand what's expected of us. We build our own frameworks that help us and make sense of our lives, and we build things that help us get ahead in life, whatever that ahead looks like for us. And then someone comes along and stirs that up for us. And we're like, no, you can't do that. That's not what you should do that. Some of us listen and go, well, maybe I was wrong. Maybe my expectations were. But more often than not, if we're honest, inside of us at least, we're like, no, you're wrong. This has worked for me for a really long time. Why would you want me to change? Why would you want me to step into a thing that you say works, but it doesn't? Because I have this whole lifetime of experience of what is working. And so things that can stir up our frameworks become very irritating and frustrating. Now today we're in a series, Joining Grace. And in this series we're journeying through a church season called Eastertide. And Eastertide is a season that finds and locates itself right after the resurrection, and then for 50 days exists in the space till the Pentecost, which is the time when the Holy Spirit comes down on the church, and the church is anointed and released to do the church stuff. And so Eastertide is right in this beautiful space in between. And in that space, we find that in the Bible, in the scripture, Jesus begins to appear to his disciples. And he begins to show up and show his resurrected life, and begins to teach what resurrected life looks like. And so first week we looked at the very first witness to experience Jesus as a resurrected person, and that was Mary Magdalene, this amazing woman on the margins of society whose life is forever changed by Jesus. And then last week, Pastor Curtis led us so well. He had excellent teaching. If you missed it, it's on our YouTube, and he told us the story of Thomas, when Jesus meets Thomas, this realist, this truth speaker, who had to see Jesus to believe. And Kurt beautifully invited us into this conversation, how we can be comforted even in our doubts. That our doubts and uncertainty is actually part of our life. And the doubts and uncertainty can actually live and have space in our faith. And then today, we're going to look at the famous, at least biblically famous person, Simon, also called Peter. I love Peter. He's one of my favorite characters. I'm a little bit of Bible nerd. I read lots of theology books. I read the Bible often. And Peter, I just resonate with him. And I know my name is Paul, so I probably likely should be more aligned to Apostle Paul. You're like, well, you're kind of named after your grandpa, but your grandpa was probably named after Apostle Paul. But I really do find myself aligned to Peter in a huge way. Now, before you think, okay, that's really nice, you align yourself with Peter, the guy's kind of like the rock of the church. Before you think my head is growing here, and I want to confess to you, where I resonate most with Peter is actually in his emotional reactions, assumptions, expectations, and the frameworks that he has built in his life, and how things begin to butt against them, and he just does not like it. This is where Peter and I really connect. You see, Peter has a strong religious, cultural, and social framework of expectations. And we're going to unpack them today and look at them and see what they mean if he's like a new character for you. And I see myself in all of Peter's heartfelt responses when his framework is being stirred, when someone is butting against his framework, when Jesus is pushing against his framework. Peter has all this emotional reactivity and all of that. I'm like, yeah, Peter, I get you. So what do we know about Peter? Now, Matthew's gospel, Matthew's record of the good news of the story of Jesus, the first book in the New Testament, has a very detailed, very organized story. In fact, pastor, writer, and theologian Eugene Peterson says if Matthew was alive today, he'd be the guy walking around with an organizer. I think in his book it calls it Palm Pilot, but I'm not sure if anybody knows what a Palm Pilot is anymore. And Eugene Peterson says Matthew would have been this guy. He's just walking around. He's very detailed. He's taking notes. He has he wants to get everything right, all the details right. He wants to even tell you some details ahead of time, even though they haven't even happened yet. So when you read Matthew, it does seem detailed. And then you're like, Matthew, how did you know this detail in chapter 4 when we only find out about it in chapter 16? This is just Matthew. He's just super detailed. And Matthew, in his detailed account, tells us the first encounter with Peter and Jesus. And we read in chapter 4, starting in verse 18. One day, as Jesus was walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, also called Peter, and Andrew, throwing a net into the water, for they fished for a living. Jesus called them out. Come, follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people. And they left their nets at once and followed him. So Matthew starts with this fact that Simon and Andrew are brothers, and they're fishing. And Jesus shows up and invites and says, hey, follow me. And they leave. They leave their trade, their family business, their meal ticket to follow Jesus. Here's the image of Jesus on the shore. He's like, hey, follow me. Peter's giving him the what's up wave there in the blue. And they have this interaction. Now, much happens after this invitation to Peter and other disciples, but we start with the fact that Jesus calls Peter out of his vocation out of his role, out of his title that he knew as a fisherman, Jesus calls him out and says, "Follow me." And as time goes on, Peter follows Jesus, and there's lots of interesting interactions, and Peter's watching Jesus and learning from him. And then we come to another interaction that gives us a deeper glimpse of Peter's personality, of Peter's frameworks, of Peter's social conventions, of Peter's religious conventions. And it's this beautiful moment that we really see what's going on in Peter both inwardly and outwardly. And we jump right to chapter 16 of Matthew now, starting in verse 16, where Jesus asks his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" Well, they replied, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, others say Jeremiah, or one of the other prophets. And then Jesus asked them, "But who do you say I am?" So Jesus asks, lots has happened since that "come follow me" moment. And now Jesus has done a whole bunch of things, and he says to his disciples this honest question. Who do people say that I am? And they have a religious framework because they're seeing Jesus doing some extraordinary, amazing things. Things are happening, not just things he's teaching, but things that he's doing. And they're trying to make sense of it. So they're like, well, people are like, there's a religious interpretation to this. Maybe you're John the Baptist, or like maybe you're Elijah the prophet, like these great prophets have come back. You're trying to make sense of it all. And then Jesus says, okay, that's great. But you see me every day. You've been with me every day. Who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Now let's just linger in that for just a moment. Now, those of us who grew up in the church, we kind of can allow our minds to jump forward, and we're like, yeah, that's great, Peter. Like, he's God. We know this. Jesus is God. He goes on the cross, then he dies, and then he raises to life. Like, we have these conclusions in our mind already. But if we linger here for a moment, this is an astounding claim by Peter based on what he knows and what he has seen. Jesus calls him to follow, and as Peter follows, what he sees and observes has him declare that Jesus is the Messiah. And the title Messiah is an incredibly important and sacred title. And again, today we typically don't think about the significance of it because we've either heard it in church, if you've attended church, or if you have any kind of connection to the Christian Western world, we're kind of like, yeah, Jesus, Messiah. Like, we don't think of the title in the same terms. It doesn't affect us. It doesn't, if we're honest, often play a significant part in our lives. But for the first century people, this title held an important and significant meaning because it held an important role within this title. You see, the name title of Messiah would immediately be understood by the community that Peter is proclaiming that Jesus is the King, that he's the ruler, that he's the Savior, he is the one, the anointed one. Whatever Peter has seen from chapter 4 to chapter 16 of Matthew, it's enough for Peter to make this claim. You are the Messiah. You are the one we're all waiting for. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And Peter has already, by this time, has figured this out. He is the King. So he boldly proclaims. And Jesus simply replies to him. He says, Jesus, yeah, you're blessed, Simon, son of John, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. Like, you're seeing the work of God. This is what's revealing to you. It's not because somebody told you this. You did not learn this from any human being. You're blessed. And then we learn that it is Jesus, in this moment actually, that gives Simon, son of John, his name Peter. Now Matthew has given us that knowledge because Matthew's very detailed, and this is Jesus says, Now I say to you that you are Peter, which means rock. And upon this rock I will build my church, and all the powers of hell will not conquer it. Now again, Matthew's diligent. He's given us already in chapter 4, this is Simon, also known as Peter. But this is the moment Jesus renames Simon to Peter, to rock. Not to be confused with Dwayne Johnson, the rock. If you know, you know. This is significant because rock here is not just a cool name, although it kind of sounds cool. But it's not just a cool name that Jesus is giving Simon. He's not just saying, yeah, you're now a rock. What Jesus is doing, just like Peter recognized that Jesus is the Messiah and the Messiah title has a role in it, Jesus is naming Simon Peter because this title has a role. It has a role. Peter was going to be the place or the foundation or the person out of whom the family, the community of faithful followers of Jesus was going to be standing on. The community we call the church. On him, the rock, the church would be built. Jesus gives Simon this new title and this new role. See, we can read Peter a lot of times and miss the point. There's actually a role that Jesus gives Peter. Now note this moment. Jesus asks, who do people say I am? Who do you say I am? Peter recognizes not just the name and the title, he recognizes the role of Jesus based on what he has seen. You are the King. You are the Savior. You are the Messiah. And then this Messiah, Jesus, gives Peter a new name and a new title. You are Rock. But then immediately, right after this beautiful interchange, these great recognitions of titles and roles, Jesus starts to teach what the role of the Messiah would look like. And for Jesus, this role includes death. We read, "From then on, Jesus began to tell his disciples plainly that it was necessary for him to go to Jerusalem and that he would suffer many terrible things at the hands of the elders, the leading priests, and the teachers of the religious law, and that he would be killed. But on the third day, he would be raised from the dead." But Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him for saying such things. "Heaven forbid, Lord. This will never happen to you." Peter had just recognized and interpreted that Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus teaches him this is what the Messiah will do. And now Peter takes the Messiah to the side and reprimands him. Some translations say rebukes him. It is this sharp criticism. Peter is being very stern with the Messiah, expressing his disapproval of what this Messiah is teaching. Now, in the Bible, rebuke means like a correction, a strong correction. It could also mean like pointing out somebody's sin. Peter is rebuking Jesus, telling him you're sinning. Peter, with all his bold brilliance, emotional reactivity, based on his understanding and expectations and religious and social conventions, he quickly course corrects the Messiah, takes him to the side. Whoa, Jesus. What are you doing? What are you talking about? This is not what a Messiah does. Peter's framework, his understanding of the religious structure, political structure, social order, doesn't have space for this kind of weak, dying Messiah. His belief system and his frameworks have no space, room, or theology that can handle the death of the Messiah. And now we're getting a true glimpse of Peter and his heart, aren't we? We're getting that glimpse of his hopes and his expectations. Peter, unlike Thomas, is very sure of himself. He's confident of what needs to happen in what he's saying. And he has good reason to believe this. He's convinced that he's right. He understands the Hebrew scriptures. He's heard them since he was a child. What are you talking about, Jesus? Culturally, religiously, what are you saying? This is not what is expected. I've seen you do the things you've done, Jesus. I just said you're going to be the Messiah. What are you talking about? You're going to die. This is not the plan. This is not the promise. After all, Hebrew, title Messiah is Messiah, which means anointed one, chosen one by God. Greek at that time, Christos, Christ, same meaning, the anointed one, chosen one. This is the reality. Peter is angry enough to take the chosen one to the side and scold him, rebuke him, remind him of his role, and remind him that a killed Messiah or a killed leader is a failed leader. After all, in that time, there are many who have claimed to be messiahs at that time, first century and just before. They had been indeed killed. And so Messiah for Peter is going to win. This Messiah is going to win. He's not going to lose, not if he can help it. Peter, in this moment of hearing Jesus say that he's about to lose, and so he's like, no way. That's a definite no, Jesus, not if I can help it. You will win. Peter's convinced that he knows what winning looks like. And then Jesus responds to Peter. And if we were to keep reading, he has some harsh words for Peter. He's like, get behind me, Satan. Wait, this was the rock? Get behind me, Satan. And if we just keep going, they have this strong exchange, and Jesus has these strong words and teaching and correction, and they keep going. But what we do know and see is that Peter's unsettled. His framework cannot be wrong. He gets that Jesus is trying to teach him something. He's like, no, yeah, okay, I can get behind some stuff. But no, you're not right. And then we get later in the story, much later, in fact, just before Jesus is about to die, as he said he would, Jesus is sharing a meal with his disciples during Passover. We often call it the Last Supper. And at this meal, while it's in progress, while they're sitting there, the Gospel of John tells us that in chapter 13, while they're sharing the Last Supper, Jesus gets up. And in this meal, he begins to wash the disciples' feet. He begins to show this radical throwing apart of their frameworks. This leader, this Messiah, is washing their feet. And again, Peter gets angry and he confronts Jesus and says, that's a definite no again, Jesus. There's no way you're doing this. You don't wash my feet. You don't wash my feet. A ruler, a leader doesn't do the work of the house help. That work is beneath your role, beneath your title. What are you doing? And so Peter's like, no. It's a definite no. These moments of conflict and cognitive dissonance for Peter arise from his beliefs and expectations, his frameworks of why he's right, why he grew up this way. How could this be different? And now I'm seeing Jesus do this other stuff, but it has to line up. It has to. What Peter reveals in these moments in his life for us is the distance between the real Jesus and the image that he has for the Messiah. Peter's having a hard time connecting his love for Jesus. He deeply loves Jesus, but he's having a hard time connecting his love with the Jesus that he sees, the Jesus who acts differently than he expects. And it doesn't make sense. Maybe better put, Peter reveals the gap between the true Jesus and the expectations he has for him. Let me say that again. Peter reveals the gap, the distance between the true Jesus and the image or expectation he has for him. Peter watches, listens, observes Jesus. He sees him do amazing things and he loves him. But Peter's love for Jesus is burdened with expectations, personal, religious, cultural, political, social expectations. He's burdened by them and they just don't line up. And this is where Peter really meets us, doesn't he? Like Peter, some of us hear about Jesus, learn about him, love what we're hearing and seeing. But can I suggest, and this may feel unsettling, can I suggest we love Jesus, but if we're honest, sometimes we can't help but fit Jesus into our expectations and frameworks, into expectations that benefit us, with Jesus as a supporting player of us. We love Jesus, and we love him best when he meets our frameworks that work for us. And when Jesus doesn't, we are burdened by our expectations and frameworks that we have of him, politically, socially, religiously, relationally. What are you doing, Jesus? It doesn't line up. Shouldn't I have better? Shouldn't I have more? I've done all the right things. And we are unaware of the gap existing in our frameworks and expectations from the real Jesus. And I think the same is true for Peter, who's completely unaware of the distance and the gap that exists. But Jesus keeps teaching, explaining to Peter why this is necessary, what he's doing, and this is really important. And if we would read, "Dear children, I will be with you only a little longer." He keeps coming back to this thing. Like, I'm just here for a little bit. And as I told the Jewish leaders, you will search for me, but you can't come where I'm going. So now I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other just as I have loved you. You should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. Jesus says, this is the new framework I want you to grasp. What I'm doing, whatever you're misunderstanding or not connecting with the real Jesus, this is the framework that I want you to live in. This is how people will follow me, Jesus. This is how you love. This is what following of Jesus looks like. Not success, although you may have some. Not wealth, although you may have some. Not the best marriage, health, car, house, although you may have those. No, what it looks like to be a follower of the Messiah is how you love one another. Jesus, after showing his disciples a profound example of love by washing their feet, he embodies the same love, now delivers this new commandment. He's reshaping their framework and their expectations once and for all. This is how people will know. And this framework of loving one another will bridge any gap, bridge any distance that we have developed in our expectations for the Messiah and for others. Jesus said, love one another as I have loved you. Loving others is how others will recognize me in you, by the depth of love you show to each other. But Peter, before the resurrection, still doesn't want to hear any of this. We know this based on how he responds to this. Simon Peter asked, Lord, where are you going? Where are you going? Jesus replied, you can't go with me now, but you will follow me later. But why can't I come now, Lord? I'm ready to die for you. Jesus answered, die for me? I tell you the truth, Peter. I don't think he said Pete. That was Paul paraphrase. I don't know if I lost a moment or not here, but I tell you the truth, Peter. Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny 3 times that you even knew me. Peter, with his framework, Lord, where are you going? Why can't I come? I'll die for you. That's the framework. That's the thing I get. Don't give me that love gushy stuff. I'll die. There's honor and merit in that. And then Jesus just calls them out. Die for me. Like, you'll deny me before morning comes. You see what's happening here? Jesus is actually challenging Peter's framework finally and perspective by pointing out, Peter, you can't even fulfill your own framework. You can't even live out the thing you're saying you understand. How are you going to follow me? In Matthew accounts, this even escalates more. Peter's like, even if everybody else, even all these disciples, if they deny me, I won't. Because that's what he understands. Peter's like, my love, my dedication, my compliance, my discipline, it's better than all these other guys. And yet after the meal, Jesus is arrested, and Peter enters the courtyard where Jesus is held. And there's a servant girl there, and she's like, hey, Peter, aren't you one of this man's disciples? And he's like, oh, no, I'm not. And it's cold, and the servants and the officials stand around the fire, and they're warming, and one of them says, hey, wait a minute, aren't you one of his disciples? He's like, no, that's not me. And then one of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenges him, and he's like, didn't I see you in the garden? Like, weren't you there with Jesus? Peter's like, no, that's not me. And then the rooster crows. His expectations of the Messiah and his expectations of himself are failed. I believe Peter loves Jesus. This image we have of him in the Bible of Peter, I believe he loves him, but his actions betray his love. Because the gap between his certainty and expectations for Jesus is just too large. And haven't we all had moments like this? Where our actions betray our love on some level? Where the gap between our love and expectations is revealed by our own actions? Where we don't even live up to our own expectations, to our own frameworks? And there's a lot that happens to us when that happens. And we don't know everything that happened to Peter in that moment, but we do know when the rooster crows, he realizes and he leaves and he weeps bitterly. If we've lived long enough, we know and understand that emotion. failing our own expectations, failing someone else's expectations, let alone God. Peter bitterly weeps, and it reminds us of our own tales of shame, feelings of unworthiness, of not deserving love or acceptance, as and we go through these variety of emotions of disgust, fear, denial, and it can feel defeating, earth-shaking. For Peter, this failure causes him to give up on this title rock, give up on his role, give up on this foundation for the church that was going to build on this new commandment, and he goes back to what he knows how to do. He goes to fish. But then the resurrection happens. And Jesus shows up, and while Peter is fishing, the disciples recognize him, they're like, Pete, there's Jesus. And he puts on clothes, he's naked, I don't know. It's a cultural thing. And he jumps in, and he swims, and then he embraces, and there's this beautiful moment. And just like that, this great encounter, this great, amazing moment, Jesus is resurrected. And then they just, amidst all this extraordinary events, they just make a fire and have a meal. Jesus just simply meets us. He simply meets Peter in the ordinary experience. The resurrected Jesus meets us in our present life. With all our failures, all our met and unmet expectations. And if we were to keep reading, when they'd finish eating, Jesus begins to ask Peter questions, and he asks them 3 times the same question. Basically, Peter, do you love me? 3 times he asks them. And Peter is kind of hurt. He's like, oh man, I denied you 3 times. Now you're asking me 3 times. Maybe I deserve this. But what we learn in this moment of resurrection is Jesus is not shaming him. He's reinstating Peter. Over a simple meal of fish and bread, in this ordinary moment, Jesus offers Simon, son of John, another opportunity to join in, to embrace his title and role, rock. Jesus doesn't give up on him. Rather, he invites him to join in, to change his failed expectations, to embrace a new commandment, to be loved and to love others. They will know me, Peter, if you love like this. If you forgive those who trespass against you, those who betray you, those who deny you, those who think you are an enemy. If you love out of this kind of love that's happening right now, Peter, in real time, in this reinstating, if you love like this, in this resurrected life, if you do this, the church will be built. And it will be built on this new commandment. Peter, can you step into your title? Can you step into your role? And now Peter has a choice to join in, to embrace his restored reality, and to believe it, that this new reality is greater than his failures. To allow Jesus to bridge the gap that existed in all the expectations and failures. Peter, will you join in? Will you live by this new reality? Will you live by this new command to love? Will you build the church on it? And then the story turns to us, doesn't it? The church. Those that gather around Jesus. With all our expectations, hopes, and frameworks, and failures, and met and unmet situations. Because Peter embraces the title and the role, and the church is here. With all its beauty, and with all its mess. And yet because of its beauty, and many times despite of its mess, Jesus asks, will you join in grace? Will you embrace your restored reality as a church and believe it to be truer than any of your failures? Will you, church, will you follow Jesus to repair and restore? Will you bridge the gap? Will you allow Jesus to become the cornerstone of your existence? Will you live into the title church and your role to love as Jesus loved? Will you step into this new resurrected reality? Will you live this new commandment? Will you join in? God, we thank you. Forgive us when we don't understand. Forgive us when your mystery just does not line up with our frameworks and our expectations. God, forgive us. Thank you that you're patient, gracious, and just like with Peter, that you continue to meet us in our ordinary lives and invite us to join in. Invite us to be reinstated. Invite us to take the role as Christians, those that live out your new commandment. Amen. Amen.